Derek McLane, you are back in the Emmy race this year for both designing the Oscars and Hairspray Live. It's actually your third consecutive year as a double nominee. So I guess I have to ask you first off, do you ever get tired of competing with yourself?
Yeah, tired? No, I find it an incredible honor and privilege, and I feel very, very lucky. This one thing I think I can be pretty certain of is that that won't happen next year because I don't think I'm doing a television musical this coming year. So. So I think I think that probably won't happen again this year, but or I should say next year. Not that I take anything for granted, but no, it's a thrill.
Well, congratulations again. I mean, you have been a designer on the Oscars since 2013, and one of your Emmy win came for the 2014 ceremony. So you were working on this year's Oscars, which, to say the least, were the most surprising and unexpected Oscars in many years. Were you at the ceremony? Did you watch everything unfold at the end there?
Yeah, I certainly was. I was sitting in the audience, and I think I was just as amazed as anybody else was. I had no idea what was happening while it was happening, and you know, sort of only learned about it really kind of as everybody else did.
It was certainly exciting watching it on television, so I can only imagine what it was like in the audience as someone
Well,
who's working on the show.
the audience, the live audience, was in a state of shock while it happened.
As we were here at home as well. So it's brings up the fact that this is live television, and you have basically worked almost exclusively in live television and also in live theater. You've got a couple Tony nominations as well, in addition to all your Emmy love. Talk a little
Yeah.
bit about some of the thrills, the challenges, the headaches of being a production designer for these big live events.
Well, I think a lot of it comes from the example you just gave, which is as unfortunate as that event might have been for some of the people involved. It does point to the fact that that it is live, and it is unscripted. It is a real thing happening, unfolding before everybody's eyes, and so that is part of the excitement about it. Um, and there is always that element that no matter how much you rehearse and how much you plan, there are unexpected things that happen, and they become part of the event. I would say that in some ways feels even more true on the television musicals because they're so complex, and they happen in they tend to happen in a bunch of different places, and there's so many elements that are all going simultaneously that it feels like there's more opportunities for things to unfold in ways other than were exactly planned.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that with Hairspray Live. And I actually, I happened to be there. I was not in the audience, but I was in the green room when you guys were performing Hairspray Live, and got to walk around on your sets that you designed. And it
Oh,
really was quite something to see how this was all put together. So how did this one, you've done a couple of these live events, how did this one differ?
well, this one different in a lot of ways. I mean, for one, Hairspray is kind of a huge show. Not that the other ones weren't big shows, but Hairspray has so many different elements to it. It has a lot of different locations, a lot of different sets, a lot of production numbers, a lot of choreography. Um, and so that's one difference. But the biggest difference by far was the fact that we decided to shoot. We were able to shoot this both indoors and outdoors, which is something we weren't able to do for any of the previous musicals that I've been involved with. Those others we had shot in New York, and New York in December, going outdoors wasn't really a possibility, mostly because of the weather. And so the fact that we were able to do this in LA and take advantage of going outdoors um, made the event really exciting, but it also made it much more complex because we were spread out over such a large area. So we had sets, that were outdoors. We also had sets that were built inside of buildings on the back lot, as well as sets that were on sound stages. And so, there were times where we cut between those sets live, and there were also times where we had to physically get people from one set to another. And oftentimes, a lot of the crew also had to travel with them. Sometimes cameras had to move. A lot of the dressers and various other crew had to go with them, so that the sort of opportunity for malfunction was raised significantly with this version.
Right, and I mean, just kind of touring around on this place, we had this giant soundstage with all the various sets in different places. I mean, it must be so complicated planning out going from one to the next and how that's going to incorporate into your design plans. Can you talk a little bit about working with the directors, with the camera people, in order to plan out how you're going to strategically build and place and design these things for live television?
Yeah, so when we started, the show was aired in December. We started that process really in earnest in July, and that involved a number of meetings with Alex Radinsky, Kenny Leon, Jerry Mitchell, the choreographer, and myself, which involved really scouting on the backlot, looking for places that both felt like as much like Baltimore as possible, but also had the right proximity to the sound stages. There were a couple of places we identified that we really weren't able to use because they were just too far from the sound stages, and the logistics of getting back and forth wasn't possible. There were some other places on the backlot that were even closer to the soundstage, but they really didn't feel anything like Baltimore. And so it was striking that balance and finding the places that we could most successfully adapt to turn into our kind of living, breathing version of Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
And quickly trying to create a kind of living city was the kind of the goal. That it felt like, to the extent that we could, trying to make it feel like a city with all of its sort of foibles and flaws and charm from 1962 Baltimore, that didn't feel like an empty backlot, but actually felt full of people and vehicles and cars and all the things, all the kind of commerce that makes it feel alive.
You're also working with something that was a film, and then a stage show, and then a film again. So, yes. I mean, in this newest iteration, how do you bring something new to it, but also at the same time, I guess, pay homage to the Hairspray that everybody knows and loves?
Well, the story is strong, and so that's really what we stuck to. I suppose that I saw it as my job to try to represent this visually as differently as I could from those other productions. Each one of these had their own sort of particular flavor. In terms of the script that we were using, it was based most closely on the Broadway version. It wasn't based on either of the film versions, even though there are many, many things in common. But really, we were working from the Broadway script, which was then adapted for television by Harvey Fierstein. And he did a really great job, I think, in sort of expanding in the way that you can for television from the stage, but also keeping its sense of theatricality. Obviously, it's not a completely realistic story. It's a very heightened story. It feels very much like a tale or a fable. And so I think that, for me, it really couldn't look that much like the Broadway show, because given that it was a television show, it really needed another level of realism that wasn't part of the Broadway production. And because we were working with using the backlot as part of the set, I needed to acknowledge the sort of inherent realism of the backlot in the way I approached all of the sets, including the sets that we built on the soundstage, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It does make sense. Take us there onto the day of the show. Um,
Sure.
what are some of the unexpected challenges, things that came up during the production of it, that kind of maybe threw you for a loop, or things you had to change at the last minute? Were there any things like that?
Well, one of the things we were, of course, always keeping our eye on was the weather, and what was going to happen if it was really windy or if it rained. And so we were always developing contingency plans for that. As it turned out, we were blessed with pretty great weather. It didn't rain, and so that was one thing we didn't have to contend with. We did have some wind issues, but so that's one of those things. Honestly, I felt like the day we got to to show day, we were pretty well prepared. We'd done a number of run throughs. None of the run throughs had gone flawlessly, but they'd gone pretty well. I think that we all had a sense that the live broadcast was also probably we had a good shot at doing a pretty clean show. There are a couple of little things that happened, that sort of inevitably do happen, that are might be called mistakes, but you might also just look at them as sort of the fabric of a live show, part of what makes them live. Um, from my perspective, it was a scramble to finish to get all of the notes done, um, that I had. That when you're working on a show with, I think it had 18 sets or something like that, and given that we were rehearsing every day, there's very little time to actually get at anything and do the work that you want to do on things. So you're always sort of trying to work around rehearsal, and grab moments on sets to do a little bit of paint work or a little dressing work, that kind of stuff when you can. So it was really, for me, it was a scramble trying to get all of the notes finished. I never got them all done, but I got most of them finished.
Right. Well, I mean, you mentioned mistakes. I think certainly anybody who is familiar with live theater or live television is sort of accustomed to that sort of thing, and I think it adds a little bit to the excitement, as you will.
Yeah, and it's always nice when you have performers who are confident enough that they can just sort of roll with a mistake, and maybe sort of wink at the audience for a moment if something doesn't go exactly as they had planned it.
Right. So going back to the Oscars,
Yeah,
you've done four of these now, I guess, by my count, or five?
five. I've actually done it five times.
Right. 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17. All
Yeah.
right. So you're working with something that is been on television for over 60 years.
Yeah.
How do you, I mean, doing it five consecutive times, how do you bring something new to it each time?
You know, Different ways. I've been fortunate to get to work with a couple of different producers on the show, and they inevitably bring a certain number of ideas to the table about how it should be, how they'd like it done, and so that's a place where I start. Um, so this last year, I did something that I hadn't really done with the show before, which was base it on, kind of on an architectural period. I really based it on American Art Deco, and Regency architecture, and really kind of went with that pretty much the entire way through the show. And so, whereas in the past, I think the designs I've done have been more based on sort of abstract ideas, or particular design ideas. So this was really coming up with a series of looks that all celebrated American Art Deco. And so for me, it felt completely different than any of the other designs I had done, just because it was it had such a sort of strong. I feel like it had such a strong identity in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Would you point to, are there specific things about the set that you could point to that you think really highlight the work that you
Yeah,
did on?
absolutely. So there was a set that was made out of some uh, sort of half moon shapes out of a kind of wrought iron, and that was based on a Cedric Gibbons Hollywood design, um, and you know that to me is it's a very distinctive look. The fact that he was a Hollywood production designer, I think meant a lot. The the that we had these big Art Deco buildings, sort of skyscrapers, and that was based on a Hollywood movie, Lullaby of Broadway, and which had a very similar set in it. In Lullaby of Broadway, it's of course set in New York City, and so I kind of took that idea and refashioned it after Los Angeles Art Deco, so that it really felt more like Hollywood. And there's some really glorious, fantastic Art Deco in Los Angeles, and so that's really where that was based on, and also kind of the sense of fantasy of a Hollywood movie musical is really what inspired that.
Yeah, and that attention to detail you're talking about there, this kind of like celebration of Hollywood history, I think it really adds a lot to the theatricality of the show.
Yeah, I hope that people felt that. I mean, for me, that was I really had a lot of fun doing that, and I felt like it did feel like it was honoring old Hollywood in a way that felt appropriate to the Oscars. So for me, it was a really rewarding way to approach the show.
Winning the Emmy in 2014 for the 2014 Oscar ceremony, what did that recognition mean for you?
Well, it meant a huge amount to me. It meant, I'm relatively new to television because as you noted, my career has been mostly in Broadway, Broadway and off Broadway, and doing stage shows, stage productions. And I was lucky enough to have been brought in to start designing some television by Neil Marin and Craig Zadan, both with the Oscars and also with the NBC television musicals. And I was very much aware that I was new to this field, and I'm very aware of the amazing talent that is working, on television all across the country, all across the world, really, right now. There's so much extraordinary work being done in television in so many different genres. It really is an amazing time. So, and the fact that the Emmys are awarded by your peers in that was hugely meaningful to me. The fact that other production designers would offer that kind of recognition was very, very moving to me.
Well, congratulations again on your Emmy nominations, and thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It was nice talking to you again.
Same here. Have a good one.
All right, you too.